My name is Israel Killian, but my name has not always been Israel Killian. I've came on quite a spiritual journey, and the Atlanta community had a very large part in that. I started off raised as a Catholic. My mother married a Catholic, and we were told later, after they divorced 26 years later, that my mom was Jewish. But in the end, we couldn't prove it. And because there was a suffix, I went through formal conversion. But when I was in Catholicism, my parents got married and they agreed that the children would be raised Catholic. And I went to parochial school all my life. And I always had a craving and a longing for God and the truth. And I did have my doubts about Christianity even as a young child. But I remember sitting about the 5th grade, sitting in this church with the cathedral ceilings and the stained glass windows, and I'm thinking to myself, as a 5th grader, I'm thinking, well, it has to be the truth. They wouldn't spend all this money on a lie, would they? Look at all the money they're spending. Nobody throws money that's for something that's not true. But I was still searching. After high school, I went into the military, and in the military, I was in the Catholic Church, and on base, they had a Catholic church, and right next door was a Protestant church. And I'm always wondering, what's going on in that other building, you know? So I realized now I'm an adult. I can make my own decisions. So I went to this Protestant church, and I remember being, at first, very offended. These people were talking in church. Can you imagine the irreverence? Don't they know this is God's house? But, you know, I learned to deal with it. And they had the music, and the music was beautiful, and it was very alluring, and it drew me in, and there were always young people and young girls. And I got out of the Air Force, and I went to live with my brother and set up my own place. And while I was living with him, they said, come with us to church. And I said, well, okay, whatever. And I'm going to church and getting more and more involved. And it really made sense to me. And it was a lot of the Christian doctrine, the Catholic doctrine that I was used to, the Trinity and all this other stuff, they already were believing in it. So what's the problem? It's still the same religion. And I got married in this Baptist church. And we had 6 children together. And the internet came into being. This was in the late 90s. The internet came into being, and I started to learn more. And my brother hooked up with Chabad after, well, my mother told us that we were Jewish, and it affected my brother very, very much, and he hooked up with Chabad and started learning at an amazing rate. I didn't really know what that meant, that my mother was Jewish, but I loved learning about religion. I loved learning about God. And so my brother would come up with these... No. He would come up with these theological discussions that I couldn't get out of, and I was very fascinated by it. And I started dialoguing with him, and I realized I had to do my own homework because he was getting me trapped in a corner that I couldn't get out of. And so he says, well, if you really want to learn, then you got to listen to this guy. And he gave me a big box of cassette tapes that he recorded off the internet of Rabbi Akiva Tatz. Now he says, I have to warn you. You have to listen to this guy about 50 times before you have a clue what he's talking about. But I promise you he'll teach you. So I started learning. We were in California, and we're getting close to Y2K. And I was very concerned about what was going to happen in Y2K. I'd lived through the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles, and I did not want another meltdown. And this was just before Y2K, and I had a perfect opportunity to sell my business. And really now, with hindsight, I can see that Hashem needed to get me to Atlanta, Georgia. Not only did he need to get me to Atlanta, Georgia, he needed to get me to Toco Hills. There was a Kiruv community in Toco Hills, Atlanta, Georgia, that was second to none. And when I finally showed up in Toco Hills, I was a broken man. we decided we didn't want to be in California for Y2K. We had an opportunity to sell my business, so we took this money and went out and bought a large piece of property in the hills of Tennessee. We wanted to be far away from any meltdown that was going to go on, and we were prepared. We had friends from California that moved to this particular county in Tennessee, and we said, well, that's as good as any, so we followed them to Linden, Tennessee. Ron Green, bless his heart, has come with me a few times to Linden, Tennessee, and Linden, Tennessee is a real sore spot in my heart because there's only 2 traffic lights in the entire county, and whatever my ex-wife wants, she gets. Anyway, so she was still with me at this time. We moved to Tennessee before Y2K. We had the propane refrigerator. We had everything. We were hunkered down. We were ready. We were living in the sticks. I was driving a truck, and we had the propane refrigerator. We had our large garden. We were ready for a meltdown. And then Y2K happened. It was a Shabbos morning, and my brother, who's with us now, he's also hunkered down for Y2K. And it was Shabbos morning. I remember it was about 8 or 9 in the morning. I said, well, I'm going to go upstairs and take a shower. And he goes, you can't take a shower on Shabbos. I said, give me a break. I rolled my eyes and I went up and I took my shower. And I came down after the shower. We were just kind of milling around the house. And then it happened. All the lights went out. This is it. This is it. We're ready. Don't open the refrigerator. We've got to make sure the propane's working. And then that power came on about 45 minutes later, and that was the end of Y2K. And there we are in Linden, Tennessee, about 32 miles from Bucksnort, Tennessee. What are we going to do now? So we continued to live there. There was a Messianic community there. I kind of hooked up with the Messianic community. Even while I was still in California, I had gotten her out of the church. It was like pulling teeth. And we started going to the Messianic congregation, which is basically a church with Jewish trappings. But at least it was a start for me. And at that point, I continued to learn. I was listening to Rabbi Tatz, and I listened to a shiur that he gave about David and Bathsheba that blew me away. And I'm going, can this be true? The rabbi's saying that he actually didn't commit murder and adultery? I'm going, this is hard to take. But he's got some arguments. He's got some points. But I have to research this. This is too much. So I did some searching on the internet, and I found another lecture by Rabbi Nathan Lopez Cardozo on David and Bathsheba. And he did such an eloquent, beautiful job of that story, you couldn't argue with it. And I realized I can't go anywhere. I have to learn more. I remember being on a business trip to California. I don't know why I was there. I was in California for a few days. And while I was there, I went to the Orthodox community in Pico and Olympic. And I wanted to get some kosher food. And I wanted to go into the Judaica store, get some books or whatever. I want to suck in as much as I can. And there was a rabbi, or what appeared to be a rabbi in the store, and he was looking at a sefer. And I never met him before in my life, but I'm just like bubbling with excitement after Rabbi Tatz and Rabbi Cardozo taught me about David and Bathsheba. And I'm going, is it true? Is it not true? What's going on? That means everything I've been taught as a Christian isn't true, because you can't trust it if you don't have the rabbis. And so I walked up to this complete stranger. He never saw me before. I never saw him before, never afterwards. I walked up to him. I interrupted. I didn't introduce myself. I just said, I've been doing some learning about the truth about David and Bathsheba. That's all I said. He stopped dead in his tracks. He looked up from his sefer. He looked over his reading glasses, looked me square in the eye, and he said, it's a little bit different perspective, isn't it? And I thought, oh my gosh. This was not some cockamamie idea that a few rabbis cooked up to make David look good. This is the general understanding amongst the Orthodox that what appears in the text is not really so simple. And I could never go back to church. When I told my wife I could never go back to. I said, we got to go to Memphis. We were halfway between Nashville and Memphis. I said, we got to go to Memphis. We got to go to the synagogue. And she's just like, I got to draw the line. I got to draw the line. This is not going to work. And it wasn't long after that, I came home one day, and all the locks were changed. And I was given an order to stay away from the house. It was an order of protection. And I took the paperwork back to my truck, and I went through the paperwork, and then below, I found the complaint for divorce. And I lost it. I was absolutely devastated. I worshiped the ground this woman walked on. She was my everything. And we had 6 beautiful children together. And she wanted nothing to do with me as long as I was after Judaism. And it broke my heart. But Rabbi Tatz and Rabbi Cardozo had such compelling evidence that I couldn't turn my back on it. I remember I was doing a dedicated run from Nashville to Pittsburgh on Monday morning and Allentown, Pennsylvania on Tuesday morning. And I remember one Shabbos being in Pittsburgh, and I had a meal with the family, one of the families there, and the Rebbetzin was sweeping her floor after the meal. I just remember so clearly. And I told her a little bit of my story at the table, and she says, I stand in awe of you. I said, you stand in awe of me? I haven't done anything. How can I turn my back on what is obvious? How can I continue to follow religion that I know is not true? And it was extremely difficult. And Hashem needed to get me to Atlanta, Georgia. So how do I get from Tennessee to Atlanta, Georgia? Well, I knew that I had to be with a frum community. I knew I had to have kosher food. And where do you come to kosher food but High Peking? You come to High Peking, you meet Reuven Michoel. So at Reuven Michoel, so he of course invited me to come for a Shabbos meal. I come for a Shabbos meal. Next door to the Robbins is the Schleifers. And I met the Schleifers, and the Schleifers said, well, and at that time I was now doing a run to Toronto. And Mrs. Schleifer said, you're going to Toronto? You got to stay by the Robinsons. I said, who are the Robinsons? Are you kidding? She was my best friend in school. Fine, so I'll stay by the Robinsons. So it was Pesach 2001, because I was locked out of my house 4 days before the September 11th bombings in New York. So it was right after the next, it was 2003 that I was by the Schleifers, and they invited me to meet the Robinsons in Toronto. And so I remember calling them on the phone, Chol Moed Pesach, about coming there to them for the last days. And she says, great, where were you for the first days? And I said, well, I'm a little embarrassed to tell you, but I had to work. And she says, good, you should be embarrassed. Come stay with us. So I come, I stay with them, and I was with them for 48 hours, less than 48 hours, and I realized that I had found my Rebbe. He took me under his arms and he was so encouraging, and so, just like the rabbi was saying, he was loving me. And he once said, first of all, we have to find out if your mother's Jewish. He says, you're a truck driver. I want you to find your grandmother's kever, and I want you to look at the tombstone and take a picture of it. Show me everything. So we went out. I found out that she was buried in St. Louis. I got a run to St. Louis. I went to the grave, and there was no indication that she was Christian and no indication that she was Jewish. So we were left at a dead end. He says, we're going to go through formal conversion. He says, he sent me to the Beis Din. The Beis Din said, this is going to take time. This was in Toronto. I called back to Rabbi Robinson, told him what they said. He said, no, it's not going to work. I got to take you to Rabbi Shlomo Miller. Rabbi Shlomo Miller is the Gadol Ador in Toronto. And so Rabbi Shlomo Miller heard all the testimony that Rabbi Robinson had given about me, and they basically decided we got to do it right away. So Rabbi Robinson called me on the telephone. He says, how soon can you get back up here to Toronto? I said, well, I'm due back there tomorrow afternoon or whatever it was. He says, great. That afternoon, we're going to do the bris. I'd already had a bris, but we need to do the dam. How do you say that? Right. It just drop of blood. So I went there, and the next morning, I went to the mikveh, and we had a seudah, and I was 100% Jewish. And it was very, very painful and joyous at the same time. Like we just read in this week's Parsha, the Kedah Yitzhak. And we say, how is it possible that this man waited 100 years to have a child? Then he spent 37 years training him to carry out on his mission. And now Hashem tells him to take him out on the Mizbeach and slit his throat. And the Chumash says that he got up early in the morning to do it. How do you understand that? He got up early in the morning to do this? How is that possible? And they're on the way to the Akedah, and they're literally crying drops of blood. They knew this was the Ratzon Hashem. They didn't understand it, but they knew this was the Ratzon Hashem. And so they were going b'simcha. How can you have these two opposite emotions at the same time? I understand opposite emotions. Pain and agony and ecstasy. How can you have it at the same time? I'm here to tell you. I know you can have those opposite emotions at the same time. Because I live those opposite emotions every day. There's not a day I don't think back. Now, since I'm married, Baruch Hashem, that's not an issue. But before I was remarried, there wasn't hardly a day that went by that I didn't think about what it cost me. And yet at the same time, paradoxically, I'm filled with simcha because I know I found the truth with Judaism. I know I found the truth with the rabbis. The rabbis, they are our saviors. One of the best Divrei Torah that I ever have learned actually comes from this week's Parsha. In this week's Parsha, and this is how it confirms that we can trust our rabbis, and if we want to get the truth, we have to go to the Chachamim. It says in Parshas Kisei that Noam from Moab can join Klal Yisrael because they didn't come out to greet you with bread and water. Well, according to Megillas Rus is from Moab. So we have a problem. We have a pasuk in the Torah that says she's forbidden to marry a regular Jew. Yet Boaz married her, and how is that possible? Well, Chazal say because the Torah in Parshas Kisei gave us the specific reason why they were forbidden. Because they didn't come out to greet you with bread and water. And the Chazal say that's not sneas for a woman to go out and greet men. Therefore, this decree against Moab didn't apply to the females, but only to the males. So we ask the question, where in Chumash, what's the source that the rabbis bring to show that it's not sneas for a woman to greet strangers? They don't pull these halachas out of the hat. They always have a source. That's the beauty of Judaism. They always have a source. So what's the source that they say it's not sneas for a woman to greet strangers? It's in this week's Parsha, in Vayeira. 3 malachim came to visit Avram. One had the mission of refuah, to heal Avram from the bris. One had the mission of to tell Sarah she's going to have a son. But the third malach, what was his job? His job was to destroy Sodom. Well, if you only have one mission, and your mission is Sodom's that way, why are you socializing at the Seudah? Get to work. I'm not paying you to sit around. And another question that's always bothered me, these 3 malachim, 3 complete strangers, show at Avram's house, and what's the first question out of their mouth? Ayeh Sarah ishtecha. Where is Sarah, your wife? Think about it. 3 strange men show up and say, where's your wife? I'll show you my Smith & Wesson. How about that? But Avram's not offended. Oh, Sarah, she's in the tent. Hinei ba'ohel. So 2 questions. Why is the angel there if his job's in Sodom? And why are you asking about his wife? That's none of your business. I'm here to tell you this question, Ayeh Sarah Ishtecha, is one of the most important questions that has ever been asked in all of human history. And I'm not overstating it. If anything, I'm understating it. So why is the angel there? And why are they asking about his wife? Because they had a shaila. What's the shaila? An important halakhic question. Should we save Lot when we go destroy Sodom? Or should we not save Lot? Well, why is that a question? If we save Lot, then he's going to be in the cave with his daughters, and that's going to bring Moab into the world, and Moab is going to bring Rus into the world. But if Rus is not going to be mutter to Boaz, why do we need to bother to save Lot? We need to know, should we save Lot? What's that dependent on? It depends. Is Rus going to be mutter? Well, what's that dependent on? It depends. Are the women chayav? Are the women obligated to go out and greet strangers, or is it not considered proper? Well, how are we going to know the answer to that question? Well, we go to Avram Avinu, the Gadol Ador, disguised as nomads, as strangers, And let's see what happens at his house. They go to Avram Avinu as strangers, as guests. He brings them bread and water, and then they say, Aye, Sarah Ishtecha. This was not a social question. They wanted to know the din. What's the way of a woman? Is a woman expected to go out and greet strangers? And if we understand the question, for sure, Avram understood the question. And so Avram said, Hine Bo'el, behold, she's in the tent. Go save Lot. Ruth is legitimate, and David is legitimate. It's not right. It's not proper for a woman to go out and greet strangers. Go save Lot. What do we learn from this? David's entire legitimacy is traced to the snua of Sarah Amenu. Aye, Sarah Ishtecha. Vayomer Hine Bo'el. Now it even goes deeper than that. In Shmuel Navi's day, there was a big question whether or not this decree from Parshas Kisetse applied to men and women or only to the men. So they wrote to Shmuel Navi and wrote a final psak. So Shmuel Navi wrote a 4-parakim tshuva on this very question. And we have that tshuva with us to this very day. The name of that tshuva is called Megillas Rus. Now, we just said that we know that Rus was permitted to Boaz because Sarah stayed in the tent. You can't punish Rus for not coming out since Sarah didn't come out. And we said that Shmuel wrote the Megillah to answer the question. So we should be able to learn from the Megillah that it all got back to Sarah. Says the Hudei Harim, if you look carefully inside the Megillah, every pasuk in the entire Megillah begins with the same letter, the letter Vav. The whole Megillah, every pasuk begins with a Vav, except for 8 pasukim. Only 8 pasukim, 8 verses, don't start with the letter Vav. What are those 8 letters? Yud, Shin, Ayin, Yud, Yishi, my salvation, Beis Aleph He Lamed, Bohel, is in the tent. My salvation is in the tent. Shmuel Navi coded into Megillas Rus the fact that David's legitimacy goes all the way back to Sarah. So now we could ask the question, why couldn't David just be born from a regular man and a regular woman, no problems? Why do we need all these problems with Moab? And if Rus is permitted, then tell us outright. Why do you have to code it in? Why do we need these rabbinic gymnastics? Aye, Sarah Ishtecha, Vayomer Hine Bo'el. Just tell us outright. What do we need the gymnastics for? Such an amazing answer. I heard this from Rabbi Eli Mansour. He says, this was Hashem's little insurance policy to make sure that we as a nation would hold on tenaciously to our Masorah. Because he made the king's legitimacy based only on our Masorah. We only know that a female from Moab is allowed to marry a regular Jew from our Masorah. It's not in the text. That way, if a king would come along and say, you know what? We don't need the rabbis. We don't need the chachamim. Oh, really? Then you can't be the king. We've got a pasuk. What more do you need? You're not fit. So there's an amazing pasuk in Tehillim. The Vilna Gaon asks, what's the most common phrase in all of Chumash? Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Why Vayidaber? God spoke to Moses saying, lemor, saying. Why does it say God spoke saying? Just say God said. Why do we need lemor, Vayidaber, and lemor? Says the Vilna Gaon. The Vayidaber is Torah Shebiksav, the written Bible. The lemor is Torah Shebal Peh, the oral law. There's that amazing pasuk that I will remember for the rest of my life from Tehillim. In Tehillim Kuf Yud Tes, the 119, the longest parak in all of Tehillim, it follows the Aleph base, 8 pasukim for each letter. If you go down to the first 2 pasukim for the letter Sin, it says, Sarim ridafuni hinam umid varcha b'chad libi. Officers or princes pursued me without cause, and I was afraid of your word. Who are these princes? Who are these pursuing him? This is Doeg and Achitophel, who kept casting aspersions on his yichus, on his lineage, based on the pasuk in the Midvarcha, based on the Vayidaber, based on the written Bible that says no one from Moab can join Gaza. And he was afraid. After all, he was a chacham, and after all, he had a pasuk. Hard to argue with a pasuk from the Torah. But the next verse says, Sas anoki al imrasacha kamotse shelo ra. I rejoice at your lemor, the same source, same root word as lemor, as the oral law. This was a remez to the oral law. The first pasuk is talking about the written law. He was afraid of the written law because it seemed to disqualify him. But the second pasuk is referring to the oral law that proves that he is kosher. I rejoice at your word as one who finds abundant spoils. So now we look one more time at that phrase coded into Megillas Rus. Yishi ba'ohel. Clearly it's a remez back to Sarah. But based on what the Vilna Gaon says about this pasuk from Tehillim, Yishi Bohel, what does Yishi Bohel refer to? Ohel Shel Torah. Ohel Shel Yaakov. It's not enough that Sarah was sneeze. You also have to have the Chachamim in the Beis Midrash to bring it out. Ayeh Sarah Shtecha, Vayomer Hine Bohel. And I look at these words coded into Megillah Rus, Yishi Ba'ohel. And I said, that's me. That's me. I own that. Why? Because I learned from the story of David and Bathsheba that only the possessors of Torah Sheba'al Peh had the emes. That saved me. And the Torah Sheba'al Peh is what saved David. He realized that he was kosher from our oral law. And I realized from the rabbi's teaching about David and Bathsheba that the oral law is the emes. And we have to have the rabbis to teach us that. So I encourage all of you, dig and cling close to your rabbi and learn from him. He has the words of truth. And you can't understand the word without the oral understanding behind it. So I highly encourage you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much.